high school sports in Louisiana. We had Eddie Bonine on the show last night, the executive director of the LHSAA. Joining us now to talk a little bit more about it and to give us some more clarification is a good and great friend of many years, president of the LHSCA, the Louisiana High School Coaches Association, Eric Held. Eric, it's always great to visit. How are you?
Great, Trent. Ken, thanks for having me on, and always good to be with you.
Well, listen, we appreciate the time. So a lot explained yesterday, and yet people are still trying to wrap their arms around all of this. Let's start with the obvious. Three sports, as it stands right now, have the ability to get things going. That would be cross country, volleyball, and swimming. Talk about that and why those sports would be eligible to get started in early September.
Sure, and even being an ex-football coach for 25 years and now being the director of the Coaches Association, representing all the sports. So it's just as important to talk about these, and I'm glad you're giving me that platform to talk about and represent those sports, because it seems that, and you were part of the press conference, and everybody wanted to talk about football. So it's good to talk about cross-country and swimming that can participate in Phase 2. And Adam McDowell, who is a former, I guess you could say, world-class runner in the sport of cross-country and distance running and track. And we're lucky to have him in our office as an assistant executive director, and he's in charge of cross-country and has everything mapped out with precautions or protocols and guidelines. But they can participate in Phase 2. Swimming, the same thing in Phase 2. And then volleyball can begin play in Phase 3. So all three of those sports have guidelines and protocols that must be followed in order for them to compete safely. But with all of the guidelines we've been given, that's been mapped out for quite some time when it comes to all the sports, whether it's a high-risk sport, a contact sport, no contact sport, limited contact, moderate risk, low risk. All of those things were identified months ago, and just the protocol and guidelines that go with them. So it's great to see those three sports have an opportunity to get things underway, hopefully in the very near future.
Adam McDowell does a great job. He's a consummate pro, and of course, he's a smart guy, a St. Louis guy who loves the Cardinals, so nothing wrong with Adam, that's for sure. All good. And then, of course, before we get to football, the other notable, since we're talking about the other sports, a lot of the conjecture because of discussion in other states was, well, maybe you can flip football to the spring semester, and that is still at least a last-ditch option that's out there, and the LHSA has not dismissed it yet. But the real issue there is, and you were on the high school level as a student athlete at Brother Martin, as a coach for many years at all the different schools you were at St. Mary's, at Catholic, at St. Michael's, and on, at Rummel, and so forth, everywhere you coached. Bottom line is there are multi-sport athletes, kids that play multiple sports, girls and boys. On the girls' side, you got a lot of volleyball players who play basketball, a lot of them. On the boys' side, you got a lot of football players who play basketball and a lot of football players who wrestle. And if you move football to the spring semester, well, that rules out the ability for these young men or women to play those multi-sports.
Sure, you hit the nail on the head there, Ken, when you talked about the multi-sport athletes and also crossing over from one season into the other. So there's already crossover with football and wrestling or basketball and even soccer, or whether it's volleyball and girls basketball, cross-country swimming, and the other girls and boys sports as well. So that's one thing we promote, is for the athletes to play multiple sports so they can have great experiences, of course. And that's something that's always been the topic of discussion. As I mentioned before, and as you know, football is always the number one thing that comes out there. And we are definitely working in the office with all of our assistant executive directors who are in charge of different sports. They do a tremendous job, and that's one thing they work for. One, how can we get the kids back on the field safely and protect them, but also how can we get them to have their full seasons, especially those spring sport athletes who lost their season. So there's a lot of compassion out there, not only from our office, but also from athletic directors and coaches, not only in those sports, but a lot of those fall sports as well, who realize, hey, we were lucky that we were on the other end of the season, so to speak, but they really have a lot of empathy for them and also the student athletes that lost their seasons.
All right, now to talk about football. Michael, go ahead.
Well, Eric, I know you are. You're looking forward to the day that you can write this down in ink instead of chalk. Uh, it's been a tough time. You know, I think you and I talked in one night. In fact, the three of us talked when we were making the decision on how far the playoffs were going to go last year with the football, and then they keep those things all keep moving here. Uh, are you finding yourself more as a planner or a cheerleader or a guidance counselor right now with all these writing these things down and saying could it be 6 games, 7 games, could it be 8 games? I mean, it seems like you're having to be special to every man.
Sure, and you mentioned that, guidance counselor, cheerleader, planner,
right?
You name it, all three of those, and plus every other possible job responsibility or adjective or noun or other parts of speech that you can put in there to describe all of our jobs. But definitely yes, and it's been a 4-month plus process.
You're trying to decide 6, 7, or 8, right?
Correct, and this has been going on for over 4 months. So just having foresight, and you didn't want to think of it then, but you said, hey, look, worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario back in the end of March when Mr. Bonine and I started talking about it, Dwayne Jenkins, who's the president of the LHSCA at the time and also the president of the Football Coaches Association and head coach at Lutcher and AD as well.
All right, sound like we lost him there. So I got to reconnect with Eric. Right in mid-sentence, I might add. So, Rudy, make sure you get him right back there as we try to get the explanation. And look, what you need to ask him, or we need to ask him, you can follow up, is with the 6, 7, or 8 game regular season,
right?
Who's going to determine that, first off? And then secondly, is that going to, as a result, push the playoffs back further and reduce the number of playoff rounds and teams that make the playoffs?
Right.
These are the questions that people are really asking, that want to get questions answered. And we got some answers about that yesterday. Eric can probably shed more light on that. So Eric is back with us now. So Eric, you were in mid-sentence there, so we'll let you finish your thought. So go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, just like yesterday, my Wi-Fi kicked me off, and don't know. I think that was my fault as well. But so Mr. Bonine, Dwayne Jenkins, and myself, constant contact with our counterparts in other states throughout the country, and just seeing what's going on, and countless Zoom meetings and looking at the plans of every state out there as far as their return to play plan is concerned, and just doing research and talking to people. And then, of course, when the area that Mr. Bonine is involved with on a regular basis, daily, hourly, sometimes by the minute, is with the State Superintendents Association, members of the state legislature, and, of course, the governor's office, the Department of Education, and DESE, and just being in cooperation with all of those levels of government at the state government level, and also with the education pieces throughout the state.
And the state stand regarding the select schools is a little bit different this time around, correct?
It could be. And that's something that Mr. Bonine and Mr. David Federico, who's the president of the LHSAA, they've been in contact with the select schools and what's moving with them. And it's something that just because I've been so involved in working with Mr. Bonine and members of the Football Coaches Advisory Committee and Coach Jenkins, head of the LFCA, and other members of that and other duties as well in the office, that's kind of something that I've really not paid too much attention to, and that I've, one of those things where they're the experts and they've been in contact with the select schools and talking to them about how they're playoff bracket will look, and also where they're going to play their championships. And I know Mr. Bonine yesterday talked about being in discussion with them about how the rigors of dealing with all of the things involving COVID and the restart of school and dealing with student needs, faculty needs, all of the pieces of education. And that's something that's in discussion as well with in why there's a possibility that they may, the select schools may play at the same venues. But that's something that is still in conversation and is definitely not etched in stone yet.
Visiting with Eric Hell for a few more minutes of the Louisiana High School Coaches Association. All right, so the 6, 7, or 8 game is dependent on several things, not the least of which is everything stays on time. Right now, the target is to play the first regular season game on the weekend of October 9th. That would be Thursday the 8th, Friday the 9th, or the 10th, the Saturday if needed as well. Doing the math, and I know you've done it too, that would have normally been playing week number 6 of the regular season of a normal schedule. So how do you get to 8 games if you're going to start with week number 6? I know Eddie talked about yesterday that you would start with week number 3 and eliminate the first 2 weeks of your schedule. Is that what you envision here, and how far would that push things back if you did that? And on the back end of that, playoffs, you'd have to reduce a playoff round in there some kind of way to make this work, correct?
Sure. So, like you said, you mentioned there's 3 options, 6, 7, or 8 games, and the 6 game option was one that came about. If you played 6 games and you played, I believe, a 16-team bracket, then you could finish the second week of December in the Superdome again. Of course, you'd lose 4 regular season games, you'd lose a round of the playoffs, and but it would be where the student athletes and the coaches would have the opportunity to play. The Superdome's been great. That's another group that Mr. Bonine's been in constant conversation with. Alan Freeman with the Superdome, Jeff Hundley with the Sugar Bowl, and just talking with them and having an open dialogue, and the Dome being great. They have the New Orleans Bowl in mid-December. They have
December 19th. Yep.
Correct. They have the Saints on December 20th with the Kansas City Chiefs. I believe they play Christmas Day, and then
Correct.
there's the Sugar Bowl. So there's all kind of potholes. However, the Dome with Alan Freeman and Jeff Hundley with the Sugar Bowl, they've been great at trying to do whatever they can to get us in there. So I think the best option out there, and it's not something that's etched in stone yet, and the ink definitely hasn't been put to the paper yet, but getting it to where you could play the last weekend in December, where you may have a Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday opportunity, which is good because you're not in school. There's you're over the Christmas break. There's fewer traveling restrictions. Fans can get to the games. So that's just another option right there. And if that's the case, then you're looking at a 7 or 8 game schedule. And if you have 7 games, then you're looking at a 32-team bracket. If you have 8 games, you're looking at a 16-team bracket. And a caveat to that is that no matter what regular season game option is out there, the opportunity for another game experience with a bowl game for schools that don't make the playoffs, to give their kids, to give the coaches an opportunity to play. Split the gate. LHSA takes no revenue in that, gives them another opportunity to play. So we've definitely heard some opinions about all 3. Of course, the opportunity to play as many games as possible is the most popular one, as well as having the most teams in the playoffs is a popular one as well. You always have, I give you Jennings from last year, a 23 seed. They made their way to the Dome. from the lower part of the bracket and played in the 3A finals. Mandeville was another who I believe made the semifinals, if I'm not mistaken, and they were a lower seed. You always have teams who are 17 to 25 who make those deep runs. We see it every year. And if you allow the 32-team bracket, then you give those teams who, hey, maybe early on we started off 0-2 and then we start to find ourselves.
Got better. Yeah.
And just get better. And I was part of my senior year. We started off 0-3 and then 1-2 and figured things out late, won the right games, beat the right people, made a late run, got to the semis as a 6-4 team. So anything's possible, and that's another thing to look at there with a larger bracket.
Well, some great possibilities. It's all laid out. It's changing all the time. Stay tuned. We'll keep you posted at CrescentCitySports.com. Sure. Eric Hell, thanks so much for the time tonight. Keep up the great work. You hear? You
got it, Ken. Michael, thank you for having me and representing the Coaches Association and Athletic Association. Appreciate y'all.
Bless you, Eric.
Our pleasure. Thanks, Eric.